became a tenured professor. He became a tenured professor at Harvard. He has worked mainly on economics questions and brought it out to politics as his career has progressed. Notably, he has been advisor to most of the recent Secretary Generals of the UN. And what is particularly interesting for us, I think, he was more or less the originator of the MGD, the Millennium Development Goals, that has now gone into the ESG. So I think for us, as committed climate business activists, what really is important is that we can all see the climate challenge. Whereas in business, it is how can we turn that into an opportunity? What is realistic? What can we do? And what are the pitfalls in trying to act both, Professor Sachs, within our own country, Norway, and also internationally, notably in the emerging countries. So, Professor Sachs, if you would like to comment on this, we will follow up with questions after 15, 20 minutes.
Excellent, and very good. Well, thanks. Wonderful. Thanks to be with all of you. It's always a delight to be with the Norwegian thinkers and business leaders, and I'm really pleased to have the chance. So thanks for the invitation. I'll make a few general remarks to get us into discussion. I think topics that you well know, but I'll just highlight a few points. Every day, every week, scientifically, we learn more about the human impact on the environment. And there is no good news in what we learn, in that we find that the impact of human activity is pervasive and adverse. The climate crisis is only one of multiple crises of human impacts. Of course, it is potentially devastating in many ways, but we should combine it with all of the effects that human beings are having on how ecosystems work, on habitat of other species, on the dramatic decline of species abundance, of mega pollution everywhere in the air, the soils, the oceans, and of depletion of critical resources, our fisheries, our rainforests. The list goes on and on. We really have reached critical levels of interference, so that the number of disturbances that are hitting hard worldwide are rising. Their intensity is rising. Their economic impact is rising. And it's pretty much unrelenting, this news, and it's going to get worse, because these are all systems with deep inertia. And that means that we have already set in train very adverse consequences. Climate, as you know, has overwhelming evidence of human impacts. The mean temperature has been rising at a decadal average of about 0.2 degrees Celsius over several decades. But that rate of warming seems to have roughly doubled in the last 2 decades to perhaps 0.36 degrees Celsius per decade, according to my climate guru, Professor James Hansen, so that we are within reach in the next 10 years or within risk, I should say, of already exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius upper limit set in the Paris Agreement. The effects of that warming are, of course, themselves pervasive. The warming is not just a warming of mean temperatures, it's changing climate systems, it's changing the hydrologic patterns of the planet, it's leading to significant drying of dryland areas, it's leading to increased storms, intensity, increased cyclonic intensity of hurricanes and typhoons. And of course, it risks a multi-meter rise of sea level. And all of the news that we get from Antarctica is bad. We're finding a faster disintegration of the ice sheets than was feared even a decade ago. The buttressing of the ice sheets in the Southern Ocean, continental shelf of Antarctica, is being diminished rapidly by the warming waters of the Southern Ocean. And as you know, the freshening of waters in the Arctic region, your region, our region, is already leading to a significant slowing of the thermohaline circulation, the deep ocean circulation. And that can have dire consequences for the weather patterns of Western Europe. So I'm an economist listening to climatologists as a profession, and I ran an institute at Columbia University for 14 years, the Earth Institute, that had hundreds of climate scientists. They never told me anything encouraging. They only told me it's worse than we thought, and it's proceeding faster than we thought. Now, on the other hand, the ones that constantly had good news for me were the engineers, saying that there are approaches to this, especially decarbonizing the energy system, that can provide a rapid transformation of the global scale energy system and a rapid decarbonization of the energy system. And since CO2 is something like 70% of the overall greenhouse effect, and about 80 to 85% of the CO2 is energy, the transformation of the energy sector is the #1 intervention that we need. The second big intervention is the land use changes that are also a significant driver, perhaps 20% of the carbon flux. And of course, the other main greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide, are also driven heavily by agriculture and land use. So our agenda is a rapid decarbonization and a change of land use patterns. And that's what all our conferences are about. And our conferences are not very successful because we have political systems and international institutions that are really not very capable and are largely overwhelmed and in many cases simply politically captured by these forces and are therefore relatively unable to act. Norway is an interesting case in point because Norway is certainly by temperament, inspiration, tradition, just about the greenest place on the planet. And yet at the same time, look how hard politics is when it comes to the gas in Norway's gas fields, when it comes to the question of Arctic drilling and further exploration for gas. It becomes, even in Norway, which is I regard as nearly perfect, it becomes very, very difficult to get clarity on a proper course of action to end the emissions that are going to come from all the North Sea and Arctic gas. Well, the situation's much worse in other fossil fuel producing countries because we don't have Norway's overall rationality. The United States is an utterly corrupt political system beyond what you can imagine, frankly. The chairman of our Committee on Energy and Natural Resources in the Senate, Joe Manchin, is a coal mine owner. So imagine if in your parliament, the regulatory committee was led by an owner of oil and gas industry. Don't tell me it's so. I hope it's not so. But in the United States, it doesn't surprise me that our committee is led by someone with the profound conflict of interest and who happens to be a corrupt politician to begin with. So that is in the US case, but I'd say that it's little better in, or worse actually, in most fossil fuel economies where whatever the rhetoric is, the idea is we should be continuing to produce, export, and earn money on our fossil fuels as long as possible. So we haven't really turned the corner on this story, even though we have more and more pronouncements and we have plenty of meetings. In terms of the substance of what to do on energy decarbonization, probably there's no better place to start than the International Energy Agency's report last year on net zero by 2050, which is a pathway analysis of how to actually decarbonize the economy. The basics are pretty straightforward. Renewable energy, especially solar power and wind power, of course, also hydropower, are in sufficient supply and economic availability to be the basis of a zero carbon energy system. The main idea of decarbonization is to shift power generation, electricity generation, to zero carbon sources, to electrify transport. And Norway is, of course, the world leader in electric vehicles. And what's happening in Oslo has to happen everywhere in the world, a transition to electric vehicles. And we need to electrify home and building heating and cooking. And we need to electrify as much of industry as possible. And for the parts that we don't or can't electrify, we need to move to zero carbon fuels, notably hydrogen as the best guess. So decarbonization entails mass electrification based on zero carbon energy and a substantial hydrogen economy, where hydrogen will be most likely the fuel of choice for ocean transport and for metallurgy and other heavy industry. And most of the rest of our economic activities, our buildings, our appliances, our heating, our transport, will be directly electric, except for those few applications where that's not possible. There are puzzles, of course, that remain in ocean shipping, though, as I say, hydrogen is the most likely candidate for fuel carrier. And the biggest question mark is aviation, where short-haul aviation will probably go electric in the next 15 to 20 years, whereas long-haul aviation will require some kind of either advanced biofuels or advanced synthetic liquid fuels, where we use green chemistry to synthesize fuel carriers from a hydrogen and carbon fuel stock, where the carbon is basically directly captured and then used to produce the fuel. That's a detail. The basic point is that the pathway to decarbonization is pretty well set, and the technological limits are not profound. There is a lot of learning to be done. There is new generations of cost reduction. There are learning curves to be experienced. But the basic framework of how to get to mid-century with the net zero emissions in the energy sector is reasonably clear, in my opinion. How to do it practically is another matter, because there are two big issues. One is actually getting the fossil fuel countries to behave, and that is the hardest part. The United States, Canada, Australia, Russia, the Gulf countries that produce 80% or more of the fossil fuels are all partly in the hands still of vested interests, and therefore we don't have a decisive turn in the right direction. The other thing that is needed for this, of course, is a massive expansion of the green energy industries. So we need at least a fourfold increase of production of solar modules by 2030. We need a massive increase, of course, in the global supply chain for batteries. We need a massive increase in the global supply of wind turbines and so on. None of this is outside of our capacities, but it is a major amount of investment in new industrial capacity in order to be able to achieve the scale of production of green energy system technologies that we need. There are also, as everybody knows, complicated and unsettled issues about the global supply chains of the underlying minerals, such as cobalt or manganese or copper or lithium or other rare earth compounds, where we don't have adequate global supply chains right now. China tends to dominate those supply chains, but in any event, they are at an insufficient scale. The evidence is that we are not limited by resource availability of those critical minerals, but we are limited in mining capacity and in supply chains and in industrial organization to reach the scale of production that's needed.
Dr. Sachs,
yeah. Sorry.
Thank you so much for this brilliant tour around the climate horizon.
Sorry to go on. It just, once I get started, it could go on for hours.
We would have liked you to, but we only have about 25 minutes left.
Good. Let's go to Q&A.
Björn Haugland has a lot of questions in store. Please, Björn.
Thank you so much.